Good morning. Ayin Beis, volume 3, page 1243. Aleph Reish Mem Gimel. Rebbe Rashab, in this whole section that we've been learning, that really goes back to the bottom of page 1220. So we're talking about now 23 pages ago. He's talking about what he calls the Hagdolas Hamidus, the growth and the development of emotions. Now, it's both emotions on our level, the human level, and the Avodah that we go through as we grow in our serving God and connecting to God, moving through from the earliest stages of our birth, the natural, habitual, behavioral, reflexive, to more emotional state, mutva, murgish, to emotional state that is informed by and continues to grow through our intelligence, our maturity, until we get to the level of muskal, where the mind is able to take us to higher states of consciousness, and in turn informs the emotions and elevates the emotions to that level. But now we've also learning the other side of it, how the emotions are feeding and contributing to this experience. Because being that the emotions are rooted in a very deep place within the soul, like he said, mushris in the etzem hanefesh, even higher than the intelligence is rooted. So the emotions now, once they're activated and they're experiencing higher states of consciousness, so they feed in return the mind that allows it to reach these higher states of super consciousness in arich and atik. Didn't finish the whole subject matter. We still need to understand what Abba ve'ima have when they gaze at the forehead of arich, that draws the energy from Pnimius Atik, and what the midas contribute to that. It was not clear exactly what whether because before we learned Zivuk Shalom means a complete union where Chacham and Binah are gazing upward. Then he says that for them to access Arich and Atik, the midas help them get to that level. So that still needs to be clarified, but it's clear that both the mind and the emotions are working together. And they introduced the concept of Ibur Sheni. Ibur Sheni, the second pregnancy. So there's the pregnancy and the gestation that gives birth to the initial emotions, but then there is in a state of katnus. They're an immature and a very basic level of emotional experience, like a newborn. Then there comes another. Once that those midas grow, those chicks, if you want to call them that, the mother giving birth and protects these chicks, and they grow and they mature through the Binah and through Binah. Then in turn, once they become adults, so to speak, the emotions are now mature. So the emotions then contribute backwards, like he said in the Torah, that the child gives something to the parent that the parent didn't have on their own. Some deeper strength. So we need the seichel to tame and to guide and direct the emotions. But once you do that, you release the potency that the emotions have in their deepest level. So both mind and emotions together experience these higher states of consciousness, or super consciousness, I should say. So that's a second ibur. That's the ibur of Zah in the beten ima, what he calls. That the midas are now in the belly, in the womb of Binah, but not in the birthing stage, but in the higher mature stage. So it goes through a second type of ibur. Now, as I said, I don't know if we find an example for that in physical world. We definitely have the example of a father, mother, and a mother carrying a child in the first stage of ibur. But the second stage, I don't know if we have an example for it. I would most likely say we don't. I actually started looking into the Eitz Chaim to see, but I'll get back to you if I find more information. As far as another point that he made was that just like in the ibur rishon, it's lamata medas, because there the emotions are just the raw natural reflexes. So too, The Ibur Sheni, when the midas go now to a deeper level, they're lamayla mitam v'das, because now they're reaching higher levels of conscious or super consciousness. But now it's in a state of maturity, and this is called ava b'chol moedecha, which means it's an ava unlimited in a form of complete bittul b'mitzias, nullified, and it's this personality, its natural personality that it had till now, where it's inclined to different interests, have now become sublimated only in godliness. I'm reading from the last lines in the paragraph of page 1243. I'll read the last 5 lines. It's good to read it again, because the love and the rotze and the yearning and longing is in the depth and the inner part of the nefesh. That the one that is yearning and longing and in love is completely nullified in this longing. As it is garmei. That yes, when the person is completely consumed with love, it's a dechika, it's a type of like compression, and he completely becomes like zir is completely nullified into a nekud, b'chinas primis nekudas alev, the nekudi lesba chivra and she'en ba ispashtus. It does not have any illumination. It's like it doesn't have any extension and expression. It's only ki im bittul kol atzmusi achi kenekuda achas. That means azir is garmei, like one point. As I mentioned, completely consumed with something beyond it. In this case,
what is he talking about?
One second. Let me just finish and then I'll stop for question. So, consumed with this love is completely bittul, and he then gives the sources in Ba'ata Heidim Esmatcha and Ba'abir this Samani Kachesim, which I have to look up. The Zeh B'chinas Ibur Sheni, he says, this is the second Ibur, the second Shu Iskalus Hamidas Bebina V'Aydei Zehu Aliyas Habina. This is Iskalus Hamidas in Bina, and this is also this causes an aliyah in the comprehension itself. As I explained yesterday, the emotional experience does that. So emotions, therefore, can be in different stages. You could have very natural reflexive emotions. That's the early stages of the immature, the early stages of the beginning of its development. You could have midas that are guided by intelligence. And then you can have midas that their emotional state is not about its own interests. It's completely consumed and captivated by a higher experience. Like I gave the examples, when you're completely absorbed in something that's beyond you, your emotions are also involved, but it's not me feeling it. It's not like I feel the love or I can talk about it. It's the love is actually completely absorbing. You're completely absorbed in the experience. In this case, like when you talk about people like, Nadav Avihu did not make it. But if you talk about people who completely consume with love for godliness to the point that they completely lose their own self in that love, that's what he's referring to. So it's the highest level of emotional experience possible, at least what we learned till now. Okay, before I continue, what would you like to ask?
No, I just ask, what is it talking about? The goy, the chiko, the chimo, azilas karmei.
I just said to you, I just explained it.
No, I understand explanation, but specifically, what is the specific example, though? You know?
I reviewed it last time in volume 2. The Zohar talks about that higher level of love of the inner heart that completely compresses and so-called a person loses themselves in the love. That's what I believe it speaks about in Zohar. I'd have to look up in volume 2 where we discussed this Chassidus. I remember I looked it up. Then I don't remember the details, but to me it's very clear that you're completely lost and you get lost in the love that you are. I mean, I don't know if he brought it by Kleis HaNefesh and Chelas Ava. I have to look it up exactly. The Zohar I have to look up inside. I don't remember right now. Okay, are there any other questions? So we'll continue. Vihine, and now, middle of page 1243. The pages can be found at ayinbeis.com. So he's going to ask a question. And now, seemingly, we have to understand. What connection is there between such a higher level of love that's beyond limits? Not b'chol levavcha b'chol nafshecha. B'chol levavcha b'chol nafshecha is still within your parameters. B'chol levavcha, with all your heart. V'ahavtas Hashem elekecha. You shall love God with all your heart. B'chol nafshecha, with all your soul, which means all of you. It's still you. B'chol meidecha, he's saying, is going outside of you. That you're taking the love is the higher, the love of God is elevating you to something that's beyond your structure. So he's saying, what's the shaykhis between Ava B'chol meidecha to Binah? We just said this is all from Binah. Binah is being elevated through the midas all the way to its atzmius, like we said, to this state of B'chol meidecha. Halei Binah hu asogeh. Binah is comprehension. And B'chol meidecha, like we just spelled out, is higher than tam v'das, higher than intelligence and comprehension. B'chol meidecha zeh shel l'mayla m'tam v'das dafke. Dafke l'mayla m'tam v'das. Bina is comprehension, meaning still within our terms. We understand, we comprehend. I comprehend. Meidecha is l'mayla m'tam v'das l'gamri. Dafke. Is higher than, specifically higher than tam v'das. Shezeh inyan ma'oid shebebchinas bli gvul. That's the meaning of ma'oid. You don't just say ava. You don't just say toiv. Very good. Toiv ma'oid. Very. The very means is going outside of the regular parameter. B'chol meidecha is bli gvul. Ava shal pi seichel. A love that goes commensurate, that according to seichel. Your mind is telling you, for instance, that God is good to you, that God is sustaining you, or even that godliness is good. Forget about you. That godliness is good. You understand it. That's al pi seichel. So behechresh yesh bo hagbola. If it's as ava al pi seichel, then for sure it has some limitation. Ki seichel magbilas ava, because seichel limits the ava, because that's what seichel is about. Seichel elevates, but it's also limits because seichel has its parameters, how much you understand. If you remember, he said that if the seichel compels so much love, that's what you'll have. You're not going to have love beyond what your mind tells you. Where did he say that? He said that when he spoke about the seichel, he said the seichel is according to seichel. I think he said that. I think it was at the bottom. Well, there it could change. But somewhere earlier he said anything that goes according to seichel is going to be commensurate and proportionate to the intelligence. But when you say ubechol meidecha, which is bligvul, beyond limits, that's because the love is now being driven by something that's super rational. And it's not born from the comprehension of intelligence. Okay, so this is a given that b'chol meidecha, he's saying is bli gvul, and it's not born from a contemplation. It's coming from a deeper place, most likely the natural love that a Jew has to God. That's bli gvul. So there's the midas that come from seichel. There's the midas that's coming from that place. That's l'mayla, and it's not nailed in asogas haseichel. So now the question is, v'im kein mashayches yesh lem zelazeh. So if that's the case, what connection do these two come together? How do they come together? So in other words, if midas are driven by intelligence, so they're limited. If midas are lamata midas, which means how we are born, the natural reflexive emotions, then they are in their own limited way. Maybe maybe there's also a bligvul there, but not in a tamed way, in a raw way. But when you're talking about now that the midas have gone to a place which is a form of bligvul, connection, what's the connection to Binah? Now, be very honest, I have a lot of questions about this. Like, first of all, how does Chachma come into play in this whole process? But I will leave all that question, other questions aside for now. Let's see where he's going to go with this. I mean, he's clearly going to come to explain how Binah can also become connected to something that's L'mayla Matan V'das. That seems to be the place he's going. But again, I don't want to speculate. As I always say, we shouldn't speculate. Okay, but that's the question on the table now. One thing is very clear, that the Rebbe Rashab is very thoroughly and exhaustively analyzing this whole discussion about Midas and Meichen, and is not leaving any stone unturned, literally. I mean, when I look at all this, the last 20 pages, it's really a very full picture of development of our mind and emotions work with each other. Still plenty to unpack and define, and probably worthwhile looking at it all again from the beginning to see all the details. But let's continue, and I'll try to do the best I can. And if we need be, we will look back at earlier pages of how he explained different elements here. I mean, the picture I get so far is, like I keep repeating, it starts with a natural, instinctive, and reflexive emotions, behavioral, like Nehi, what he called Ibur. It went to Yanika, or Mutfa to Murgish, where Yanika, Murgish is already some type of deliberate or tangible emotion. Not like he said by Mutva, he said it's not even tangible, it's not even a midah yet. And muskal is where the mind begins to, well, there's lower level, there's the muskal, there's the murgish al pi ha-muskal, the murgish al pi ha-seichel, al pi ha-mechin. So there's how the emotions continue to grow with the cognitive. In the cognitive itself, we learned about outer mechitzenis ha-mechin, pinimis ha-mechin, Binah, Chachma, and Chachma is where it elevates to a point where you can actually transform, not just refine, but transform the midas. Then he went to the Yichud Zivug Shalom of Chachma and Binah, is another element that we need as they gaze at the forehead of Arich that draws from Atik. And now we got back to that the midas themselves are this Binah in a state where protecting its children, its offspring, its emotions. And then there's where the midas grow to a point where they elevate Binah to the level of B'chol Meidecha, what we're talking about here, to this higher level. Well, he also said they elevate al diz misalim chinas Chachma Binah, both Chachma and Binah. But now he's talking about Binah, and now the question is, how is Binah, which is hasaga and comprehension, which is defined and limited in its parameters, connect to something that's bleakful and beyond? That's where we're at right now, just as the flow goes. But it's very clear that, as I said, that he's analyzing it from every possible angle. Now, continuing on, ube'emes, and in truth, b'chol meidecha hi b'chinas Binah. The truth is that b'chol meidecha is the level of Binah. The chen hu b'zer chelik beis daf chav zayin amud aleph. So he asked the question, and now he's saying, in truth, when you look in the text, that's what it says in Zohar. Indeed, in Zohar, volume 2, 27a, Chav Zayin Amud Aleph, he says, the Isa Sham. What does it say there? V'chol levavcha do yamina v'smala. And you say levavcha with all your heart. So you say levavcha, not lipcha, one heart. You say levavcha, which means both parts of the heart, both sides, the right and left side of the heart. So he says, do yamina v'smala. That's right and left. B'chinas chesed gvura. So b'chol levavcha is chesed gvura. The ikra, yetzer tev, v'yetzer hara. That's called the yetzer tev in the right side of the heart, and yetzer hara in the left side of the heart. And v'hafta b'chol levavcha means that both sides, chesed and gvura, are loving God. It's saying a layman. He's explaining what does that mean? When the Zohar says that you have chesed and gvura, because from chesed and gvura evolve in the human being the yetzer tev, the good inclination, and yetzer hara, the bad inclination. Ubeharamasham, Ramaz is Moshe Zakuta, a famous classic Kabbalist explaining Zohar. He says, Ramasham Keneda, the Minachazeo Lamata, who b'chinas Eitz Hadas Tevera, Chazay is I keep forgetting the English translation.
Chazay, chest.
The chest. And below is the level of Eitz Hadas Tevera, the tree of knowledge, good and evil, the Misham Shedish Beis HaYetzer. Because from there is the root of the two inclinations, Yetzer Teva and Yetzer Hara, Ukamesha Kosher B'Mokem Acher. So the parenthesis is just explaining how Chesed and Gvura connect to Yetzer Teva and Yetzer Hara, because it evolves. And the Ramah says that it all starts from the Chazei Lamata, from the chest below, meaning the lower part is these two dimensions. The Zohar continues now. He's quoting a long Zohar. Ubechol nafshecha, that's bechol levavcha. What's a bechol nafshecha, says the Zohar? Don nefesh David, dis yahivis benayu. This is the spirit, the soul of David. What's this yahivis benayu? I'm not sure.
That was given between these two, Chesed and Gvura.
Dishavis means Yehovah means to give him benayu between Chesed and Gvura, do you think?
Yeah.
Okay, maybe. Again, he quotes the Ramaz, but Ramaz says, Ramasham, this is Bechinas Keser Malchus. I don't think it was given between them. I think was given from between them, maybe. No, it's Chesed Gvura, then you go down, because it says Keser Malchus. Keser Malchus, is it Keser of Malchus, or is it Keser Malchus that's higher than Chesed and Gvura? I'm not sure. I'm going to look it up, but okay, meanwhile, that's what he says. What about a B'chol Meidecha? So the Zohar continues. B'chol Meidecha, li'chlololon li'ela basar, the lesbe shiura. Who habina, the Rebbe Rashab says. So B'chol Meidecha means li'chlololon, to be encompassed above. Basar, in the location, the place, the lesbe shiura that does not have any limit. Shir is a limit. This is the level of B'chol Meidecha. Levavcha and Nafshecha both have a parameter. Chesed and Gvura. Then B'chol Nafshecha is the Nefesh of David. Said Keser Malchus. B'chol Meidecha is that Lichlolon, to include in a level that doesn't have measure, doesn't have limits. V'hu habina. So you see clearly in the Zohar that it says B'chol Meidecha is Binah. This doesn't mean the question is answered. He's just saying that we see clearly there is a mocker that B'chol Meidecha is Binah. Now he explains further. Umasha Binah nikla de lesbe shiyuda. Why is Binah called a level that doesn't have a limit? Ki hi b'chinas ma'amakim korasicha. Because Binah is the level of ma'amakim korasicha. From the depths, korasicha, I call to you. Ma'amakim eimek, the depths. So he explains, another Zohar. Like it says in Zohar B'Shalach, Daf Samach Gimel Amud Beis, in Zohar B'Shalach, page 63b, what does he say there? He says like this, Shanikra Umka de Kula. This is called the depth, the inner depths of everything. In other words, there's the outer dimension of something, and then there is the Umka. Emek is the depths. Like mamakim, the depths of the heart or the depths of the individual. Okay, I see there's a lot of Zohars here, but bottom line is coming to explain how Binah is connected to no limit. So we still have to hold on. Not sure what that means. He just said mamakim, so it's umke de kula, ubezohar truma, yet another Zohar, truma, daf kuf mem beis omer aleph, 142a, Isa, the neshama she b'chinas Binah, Salku goy nevia da atikin stima de kol stimin. That the neshama, which is the level of Binah, it flows. It is the flow of atikin, the stima de kol stimin. It's a flow coming from the atik. Of course, means ancient, but here means atik da atikin, the atik of atik. The stima de kol stima, the concealed of all the concealed. So in other words, Zohar is clearly associating Binah with the inner depths, all the way rooted in Atik and stima de kol stima. Didn't explain, he's just saying that's what it says in the Zayas. And because of this, since Binah is reaching into these inner, maybe everybody can mute. Since Binah is reaching into the inner depths, that's why Binah is called the level les be'shiyura, that it doesn't have a shear, doesn't have limits, it doesn't have boundaries, it doesn't have a measure. So all these zayas are all leading to one place, that Binah is rooted in a very deep, profound place called Bli Gvul. And based on this, that's the case, that's why B'chol Ma'odcha, which is without limit, Bli Gvul, is in Binah. But this doesn't explain why. That's why it continues now and says, "V'tzarich lahavim eich shayachim zeh lazeh." This just tells us it's connected. Now we know that. Like he said, it's the sources for it. But what is the connection? How are they connected to one another when Binah is hasaga, comprehension? So now we're going to go into a deeper understanding of what Binah is really about. The mother that was on one end hovering over and protecting its offspring, the emotions, has another dimension to it that clearly goes into very deep levels. B'chol ma'odecha. That's what we so far have established, but he didn't explain why. Oh, I see. Now he does explain the Zohar a bit more. Okay. Okay, so that's one question. What's the connection? Gam zeh tzarich lahavin mashin is bar liel. Means however, or in addition to. We also have to understand what we learned earlier. This is about Binah. But earlier we learned, at the end of last paragraph, I'm going back to the Zohar. Now I see that he's using more words here. Now I remember. We learned, if you remember in volume 2, I think that's where it was, or Achelas Ava. When a person is completely consumed with love, they can lose themselves entirely. They lose their intelligence, they lose everything. And now we usually find this example in negative things. Like the Gemara brought, that we brought from the end of Sanhedrin, the end of chapter 6, I believe, about that individual whose claims that he saw a beautiful woman, and he says he'll die if he's not going to be with her. So the Gemara says you're not allowed to, he's not allowed to be with her, and you even let him die. But Chassidus brings that as an example of someone completely consumed with love, to the point they lose their entire being. The Zohar is going back now, that what we said before, the Ba'ava b'chol meidecha, who the Megav, the Megoy Tchika, the Rechima, the Lo Yochla Lemizbal. That was the point. Before he didn't use the words Lo Yochla Lemizbal. Now I'm reminding myself. What happens is that when a person reaches a point, the heart, the love, so compresses him because he cannot contain it. He cannot contain it. Mizbal means to savor it. So therefore, Azir is Garmei. So he completely becomes like nullified into coiled up into one point. So he says Vahainu, which means Shalev Eni Yachal Izbel. The heart cannot contain it. So in other words, there are things the heart can contain, and you don't lose yourself, and you don't become completely overwhelmed by it. But B'chol Meidecha, he says, so I love any yochel is, but next page, 1244. That's why it becomes a nekuda that has no, you touch chivra, you touched yesterday, light, right? I think chivra, isn't chivra whiteness? 1 second.
And the same thing. White,
okay,
and light.
White, like brightness. Okay, got it.
Hey,
okay.
There's no espastus.
Right, there's no espastus. And because of that, it becomes a nekuda, and there's no extension. In other words, completely overwhelmed. The whole personality of the individual is not expressed. Everything is like, it's like, as I said, it coils up like almost like in a fetal position. Like it says in a number of discourses, the when you say b'chol levavcha with all your heart, it means something the heart can contain. And nafshecha means that the love fills up all his faculties. But nevertheless, it's all the faculties are able to contain and tolerate, or carry and contain. When you say ma'oitcha, meaning beyond your containers, it's with the heart and the faculties of the soul are unable to contain it at all. So you lose yourself. So in other words, there's a level of love that's containable, it's still love, and there's a level of love where the person gets lost in it and is unable to contain it. It's overwhelming, basically. So here's the question. And isn't it the case, seemingly, indicates on the intensity of the love in the heart. That's on the contrary. It's even more extension and revelation. In other words, b'chol levavcha is within the parameters that your heart can contain. B'chol nafshecha, it also spreads into your faculties, but it's all something that they can contain. B'chol ma'itcha takes it even further. The love is even more expressive, which seems to be the opposite of the bittul that he's describing. So he's asking, so what does it mean? So why does the Zohar say that he coils up and there's no spastus at all? And he gives an example. Well, actually, you know what? The rest is a parenthesis. So his question now is, the first question was about Binah. Binah is comprehension, which seems to be gvul, limited, Shiur. Then you say Binah, no. The Zohars all indicate that Binah is connected to something beyond limit. Eimek, the depths and everything. He says, the truth is we have to also understand what he said before about why is it that the case that this Ava causes a total loss of the person's structure. Bittul b'mitzias, like he says, where he becomes aziris, he becomes like completely like one nekuda, no extension at all, when on the contrary, it should go progressively. First, it fills your heart, it fills your faculties, and then it goes even beyond that. It's a much greater love, not one that causes you to lose yourself. And he's going to give now example from tshuva. Ukamei b'tshuva. Diksiv, by tshuva it says, ma'makim koresicha. He's bringing back ma'makim that he brought before the Zen. From the depths I call to you, ma'emeku pnimis alev. From the depths and the innermost part of the heart. How does it dafke b'tzaika b'kel pashut? This tshuva that comes from the depths is not expressed in words. It comes with a cry and with a seamless, a shapeless call. It's like when a person just cries out, tzaika, just a cry from the soul. When it comes from the innermost. When, for example, you're davening and you're asking for something, even though it's coming from your heart, but it can come in words, it's containable, it's expressed. But the tshuva mu'umke deliba that he says from Mamakim is a tzaika b'kol pashut. It's like, oi, like that. It doesn't have any form of defined expression. Shezeh inyan tkiya shefer. That's the inyan of blowing shefer. Shehi b'chinas tzaika pshuta mu'umke deliba. It's like a shapeless or a seamless cry from the depths of the heart, the koil she'ef shelislabish b'dibur, from a voice that cannot manifest in words, in speech. So speech has its value, but now we're going deeper, and when a person cries from their innermost part of the heart, it's a cry that's not contained in speech. Shezeu dafke b'koil haba al pi haseichel. When it's dibur, it's a koil, it's a voice that comes al pi seichel. So you say to Eibishter, Rifa'enu, or you say Vina Malkenu, or whatever it may be, the words means it's a koil, a voice that's coming commensurate to seichel. Sheba b'murkiv b'dibur. that seichel comes in a type of composite in words. Murkav means when it's combined, it's not pashut. The opposite of seamless is murkav. Pashut means it's shapeless. Murkav means it has shape and form, like shiur. It has shape and form, which comes into words. Words are made up of letters. That's a murkav. A cry from the depths of the heart is not murkav because it's not made up of parts. It's just a seamless and shapeless cry. Mashenkin atzaike de tshuva, he bekel pasha dafka. However, the cry of tshuva is a kel pasha. It's not a kel dibur. Kel dibur is a kel of voice with letters and words. This is a kel pasha, a shapeless and a seamless cry. Ubabi's galus beyeser, and it's more revealed than words. Words limit the flow of the emotion. When you cry out, it's like unlimited. It's when a person just lets go and lets themselves cry to God without words, which is like the Koel Pashat of Shefer. That's a far more his galus. It's not less. He's bringing proof that when you go deeper, B'chol Meidecha should be more gili, not less gili. It's actually untamed gili when a person just cries like that. The Koel Haba B'dibur Eina B'tekefu B'izgalus Kol Kach. Because the voice that comes, the dibur in words, in speech, is not that intense and that revealed. That's an interesting proof. Like we say, the words of the wise, we hear them in a very, I say nachas, in a pleasant and controlled way. It's not, you don't hear, chachamim don't yell and scream.
Calm,
Gentle, serene, right. Benachas, pleasant. So you see from that dibur is actually controlled and limited. Avol koel poshet, when a person cries out, the koel poshet without words, without letter, husababa taken for bizgalus, that comes with intensity and very revealed. Ukumei vayizaku vayikru bekel gadol. They cried out and they called out the koel gadol with a great sound, with a great voice. Like love that comes, like we see by love. The love that comes from the depths of the heart, like we're talking about here. It's an increasingly intense and revealed. So hence we have the question, why are you saying that B'chol Ma'itcha actually creates a tzimtzum and a bittul rather than a more ispashtus? It's actually even more love. It's like a love that's so powerful. So B'chol Meidecha therefore is more, not less, so to speak. So we have here two good questions on the table. One is the connection of Binah to B'chol Meidecha. Why is Binah taka l'mayla mishir without limits? And the second, that the issue we discussed before about a love that creates a complete bittul in the person, that they lose themselves, l'chayra, seemingly B'chol Meidecha actually is more expressive, not less expressive. It doesn't silence you, it actually makes you louder, so to speak, more intense, more revealed, more expressive without the limits of words and the limits of love in B'chol Levavcha, B'chol Nafshcha, which are containable and more commensurate to the person's structure. So those are the questions. Anyone need clarity on this paragraph, or we have? If not, we can just continue. Might as well. Also, we have here Rosh Hashanah material, interestingly, very directly. I always wonder whether the Rebbe Rashab was planning when he would turn this into Maimarim, which didn't end up happening, that maybe some of these Maimarim end up being connected to the holidays around that time. I don't think so, because based on the pages, the last Maimon in volume 2 was Vayera. So it's not likely that this would be around Rosh Hashanah. It's too close. It's only we're only around 40 pages in. So it's usually more than that, but it's interesting anyway, just thinking out loud. Okay, let's continue. We have time, let's continue.
We're trying to figure out the difference between the point, the bittul, at the same time as calling out to everybody. And I don't see it I don't really necessarily see it as a conflict, but because I see both of them happening at the same time. I don't know, is that the problem?
Well, it's clearly he's asking a question. He's asking a question here, yeah. Because on one hand, it seems that the B'chol Ma'itcha causes the person to completely lose themselves, and it's therefore no gilui, it's like a nakuda, basically silencing the individual, whereas it seems that B'chol Ma'itcha, like with tshuva, is actually a greater cry and an even greater expression of love. So you can speculate your answers, but that's the question that's on the table, yeah.
In the beginning of today's class, you said the Rabbi correlated the right side of the heart and the left side with Chesed and Yetzer Tov, and the left side with the Gevurah and Yetzer Hara. But we know there's Chesed of Klippa and Gevurah of Kedusha. So how could that?
What was the contradiction?
Because it seems to be that he's saying that that Chesed is only Yetzer Tov and Gevurah is only the left side.
He's not discussing about Chesed and Gvura of Klippa here. He's discussing Chesed and Gvura in Atzilus. You have two emotions. That one will be, like he said, the Zohar says, that from Chesed and Gvura, Nishtalshel, Yetzer Tov, Yetzer Hara. I mean, the fact that the Yetzer Hara, the Nefesh Habamis has Chesed, fine, that's fine. But when we're talking about Chesed and Gvura of Kedusha here, that they are the root that will ultimately evolve into those two.
But I think he clearly said Yetzer Tov and Yetzer Hara, no?
Yeah, you said that clearly, yeah. So what's the contradiction? To say that Chesed and Gvura evolve into the Yetzer Tov, Yetzer Hara is not a contradiction to say that the Yetzer Hara, the Nefesh Habamis, has Chesed as well. Why is it a contradiction? Yeah, the right side of the heart, the left side of the heart is Chesed and Gvura. Yetzer Tov, so Chesed and Gvura, Nishtalshel, yeah.
Because it would seem that the right side as well it's just not just Yetzer Tov. It could have.
In Tanya, he says the right side of the heart is where the Nefesh Elokis resides. Nefesh Habamis is the left side of the heart. That's what he says in chapter 9. The Zohar is saying that it's rooted from Chesed and Gvura. I'm not clear what your question is. I mean, Atzilus has Chesed and Gvura. They're both Kedusha there. Chesed and Gvura in lower levels can evolve. Chesed will evolve into Yetzer Tov, into Tov. The Gvura will evolve the concealment ultimately into Yetzer Hara. The Yetzer Hara could also have Chesed and Gvura, just as the Yetzer Tov could have Chesed and Gvura. That's not a contradiction that they originate from these two tracks.
Okay, as long as now you're saying they devolve into the law, the Chesed Sheba Klippa or Gevurah Sheba, the Kedusha is even though the main lines are that way, they can have the it does have Iskalos also on that side, both sides.
It's not relevant here, even if it does. It's not. The key here is that there are two different. It's like from the Tzimtzum will evolve things that are concealed. From the Ur will evolve things that are revealed. That's like the point here. Okay, so let me continue reading. Next paragraph, page 1244. He says, with Tzorich Leimer, we have to say, the Ba'ava de B'chol Meidecha, in the love that is with all your might, with all of you, what he called before Blikvul, Shi Be'emek U'Primis Halev, which is in the depths and the innermost part of the heart. U'Lamayla Matam V'das, and it's higher than, it's super rational. You have to say that Yesh B'zeh Gufa, and B'chol Meidecha itself, that has Beis Madreges, Chitzenius and Primius. So he's now distinguished, saying in B'chol Meidecha, we have to say B'chol Meidecha. You have to say there's two levels, the an outer level and an inner level. So he's breaking this down now into two parts. Like the Kol Poshet that we talked about just earlier, the shapeless or seamless voice, that comes out, that is drawn, emerges from Hevel Alev, from what we call the cavity of the heart, or the breath of the heart. Shenikret Saika, which is called a cry. How do you do it? It's known that this itself, this cry, has two levels. Tzaikas hakel poshet, the cry of a shapeless voice, just a shapeless cry. Sheba berash v'tzaikas halev. I'm sorry.
Sheba berash.
Yeah. So one is tzaikas hakel, that comes, is very noisy, very loud and noisy, like a very loud cry. V'tzaikas halev atzmai k'may tzoak libam el Hashem.
No sound.
And then there's a cry from the heart that itself, that is like like no sound. It's just the heart is crying out to God. It doesn't make any sound. Look in the Maimer Va'era. I have to look that up. So we see now in Ava B'chol Meidecha, he's saying there are two levels, an outer and inner, an outer and inner level, like it is in Kel Poshet. One can express itself with a very expressive way and a noisy, loud cry. Rash means it's very expressive and very apparent. And one, it's an inner cry. So now he explains what this means. Because now it's known the difference between a shapeless and a shaped cry. I'm using the word poshet as shapeless, meaning seamless, just a cry. Murkav is when it's a composite, it's made up of parts, like with words. Like he said before, the kel murkav the composite voice, the voice that's made up of parts, or more defined, the defined voice, comes from kavana shebemeich v'lev, from the intention in the mind and the heart. Commensurate and proportionate to the excitement in the person that comes from the divine comprehension he has. A person contemplates about godliness, and selekzach means it's contained, it resonates, it settles within, it's integrated within his mind and the heart, in a very integrated way, internalized way. In direct proportion to his understanding and his intention, that's how it will express itself. His voice, b'dibur, will express itself based on his understanding and comprehension. So in other words, it's a very contained, defined form of expression. I'll just use a simple example. It's like you need to, let's say, share an idea in a presentation, a speech. I'm talking now even in the secular terms. We'll soon get back to loving God, to the expression of godliness. So what you do is you contemplate, you prepare yourself, you train, you do your research. Let's say you prepare notes, and then you make your presentation. It's going to be a very strong presentation, but it's defined by your the ideas that you formulated. So the same thing in our relationship with God, when a person is, like he says, Kel Murkiv, meaning you're going to cry out and speak to God, is going to come from your intentions. You're not just what you contemplated on. You contemplated on something about godliness that in turn will form the expressions that you will express as you speak to God. That's Kel Murkav. Ulapamim, and at times Yedaber the Kel Ram. Sometimes this individual will speak with a loud voice. Like when the words are spoken from the heart. That comes from more inner, more place in the heart and the mind. Al kain ba b'kel ram. So you ever see a person gets very emotional in their conversation, their talk. So they start speaking. Kel ram means a louder voice. They get more excitable voice. The im kol zeh, and even when that's the case, hu murkev be'esius hadibur. It's just that it's excitable. He's still speaking words. You could understand what he's saying, what this person is saying, but it's louder. It's more passionate. That's a good word. More passionate, but it's still murkev be'esius hadibur. It's still a composite of letters of speech. And the parentheses, he explains why. Kikoil zeh, because this voice, this sound, hu murkev ba'atzmai, not just the words, but the sound itself. We learned this earlier as well, that in order to produce a sound from your mouth, you have to have several components. You have to have, it itself is a composite of gimel yusedis, eish mayim ruach. For example, a person who's, let's say, very, very dry throat, or very dry, their mouth is very dry, they can't produce a proper voice. If their mouth is too moist, they also will limit the way they express themselves. So there's mayim and eish, and ruach is the very breath that you need when you speak. So basically, speech is not just sound. It's made up of different elements that cause a speech to be a smooth expression. There's moisture, mayim, there's eish, warmth, like a type of like something drier, and then there's ruach, the breath itself. So you need a good combination. So this is already a deeper explanation because the koil itself is made up of a composite. So that's why it also comes in the composite of letters of speech. Now you could say, what's the connection between the two? Well, in the root of the creation of speech, of sound, God made it in a way that the sound is made up of parts. So therefore, when the sound is expressed in this context of words, it comes also into words. Now, the truth is, you could say, what about a cry? Tsaika, Kel Pashut also comes from a sound that requires this composite. I'm not sure the answer to that question, but that's what he says here in this parenthesis. We'll see how he goes here. We'll soon see. The kol zeh, and all this is umipnei shukel haba masogas hasechel, because it's a voice, a sound that comes from asogas hasechel, meaning it's driven by the comprehension of the mind that is in turn informing the expressions in the speech. Avokel poshut, but a shapeless sound, like a cry. Hu she'ena yochelias murkev beis adibur. It cannot be murkev. It cannot be a composite made up of letters of speech. It's just a cry from the depths. V'zehu hera gemura. The mere fact that it can't be expressed in words, that's a total indicator. That's an absolute indication. Sheyetzim eprimis nekudas halev shelamayla min hasechel v'atam. That is coming from the inner more nekuda, the point, the core of the heart, that's higher than intelligence and v'hatam and reason. She'ein b'koyach hasechel la'achile u'la'gbile klal. The power of intelligence cannot contain it and limit it in any way. So it's like almost overriding intelligence. When a person cries like that, it's not based on a logical structure. It's not like, you know what, we're not talking about here spontaneous crying, spontaneous dancing at 9 p.m. We're not talking about someone who's planning to cry. We're talking about a cry that just comes from a deeper place and it overrides the intelligence of the person and the structure that would usually come from seichel. And that's called a cry. That a person suddenly, unexpectedly cries out, b'kel rash, with a loud voice or passionate voice, in a shapeless and seamless cry, voice, when he's excited, when he's stimulated, or something is touching the depths of his heart, from the innermost nekuda, point, core in the heart, and increasingly, that's higher than intention and deliberate thinking or understanding. I'm going to stop here. He's going to say the example from Malachim. So now he's entered into the world here of in B'chol Ma'itcha itself. He's developing two different levels. One is a very expressive, passionate cry. One is a silent one. But to understand that, he went back to Kel Murkov and Kel Pashut. The difference between a voice that speaks, a voice of reason that's defined by an intelligent approach, and a voice that is beyond reason and overrides reason, which is the Kel Pashut that he's talking about, that's not Murkov. So I'm going to stop right here, which is 2/3 of the way down, page 1244.